She called the police on me for blocking my own driveway. But she had no idea who she was reporting. The morning started like any other quiet Saturday on base housing property. The air was crisp, the sun barely clearing the rooftops, casting long golden shadows across the neatly lined driveways. I had woken up early because contractors were scheduled to reinforce a drainage line that ran directly beneath my driveway. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was necessary. The cones were set up properly. My truck was parked across the entrance to prevent anyone from accidentally driving through wet concrete. And a temporary notice had already been submitted to housing management the week prior. Everything was by the book. I was sipping my coffee, reviewing a few messages on my phone, when I heard the sharp click of heels on pavement. Not the casual shuffle of someone walking their dog. This was deliberate, fast, aggressive. "Excuse me." A voice snapped from behind me. I turned slowly, and there she was, perfectly pressed pastel blazer, oversized sunglasses, clipboard tucked under one arm like it was a badge of authority. Karen, the unofficial enforcer of the neighborhood. The kind of person who didn't just read HOA guidelines, she memorized them. "You cannot block this driveway," she declared, gesturing dramatically toward my own property as if unveiling a crime scene. I blinked once, letting the silence stretch just long enough to unsettle her. "It's my driveway," I replied calmly. "There's scheduled maintenance this morning." She gave a tight laugh, the kind people use when they think they're about to educate someone beneath them. "This is a shared access community roadway. You're obstructing neighborhood flow." That's a violation. Neighborhood flow? At 7:12 a.m. on a Saturday. A couple of curtains shifted across the street. Mr. Delgado paused mid-dog walk. The contractors, sensing tension, suddenly found the gravel at their feet extremely interesting. I cleared it with housing management. I said evenly. "Work order S filed. Should be done by early afternoon." Karen stepped closer, lowering her sunglasses just enough to look at me over the rim. "I am on the HOA compliance committee. I didn't see any approval come across my desk." That was interesting. Because this wasn't HOA territory, it was base housing under federal jurisdiction. The HOA handled landscaping aesthetics and mailbox paint colors. They did not oversee infrastructure repairs. I am sure that's because it didn't need to. I answered, keeping my tone neutral. Her lips tightened. She wasn't used to neutral. She was used to flustered apologies. "You can just decide to shut down access because it's convenient for you." She pressed. "What if emergency vehicles need to pass?" I glanced at the wide, completely unobstructed road. 2 full lanes. 0 traffic. A fire truck could have hosted a parade down it. "They manage," I said. That did it. Her posture stiffened. Clipboard clutched tighter. "I've lived here for 11 years." She announced loudly enough for the shifting curtains to hear. "We have rules so people like you don't take advantage of the community." People like me. Interesting choice of words. I set my coffee down on the truck bed and finally faced her fully. "Ma'am, I assure you, everything here is authorized." She shook her head, stepping back as if I had just confessed to a felony. "We'll see about that." She pulled out her phone with theatrical flair, angling it carefully. "Photos of cones, of my truck, of my driveway. evidence of the great driveway obstruction of Saturday morning. The contractors exchanged looks. One of them quietly muttered, "Should we come back later?" "No," I said without breaking eye contact with Karen. "You're good." She tapped aggressively at her phone screen, then looked up with unmistakable satisfaction. "If you want to move it, I'll escalate this." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Across the street, Mr. Delgado stopped pretending not to watch. I leaned casually against my truck. "You're welcome to." For a split second, something flickered across her face. Doubt, maybe, or irritation that I wasn't rattled. But pride won out quickly. "You'll regret being dismissive," she said sharply. And with that, she spun on her heel and marched back toward her house, phone already at her ear. The neighborhood fell into a strange, expectant quiet, the kind that settles before a storm. I picked up my coffee again, unfazed. I had a feeling this wasn't going to end with a polite email from the HOA. Karen didn't just walk away. She performed her exit like it was the final scene of a courtroom drama. Phone pressed to her ear, chin lifted, voice intentionally loud enough for the entire block to hear. "Yes, I'd like to report someone obstructing a residential roadway," she said sharply. He's refusing to comply. I took a slow sip of coffee and leaned back against my truck, watching her pace in tight, irritated circles near her mailbox. The contractors stood frozen beside their equipment, unsure whether to continue working or pretend they weren't part of whatever was unfolding. She glanced over at me while speaking into the phone. "Yes, I've already asked him politely," she added, exaggerating the word politely like she deserved an award. "He's being confrontational." Confrontational. That was new. I hadn't raised my voice once. Within minutes, you could feel the shift ripple through the neighborhood. Front doors cracked open, blinds tilted just slightly. Mrs. Patterson across the street stepped out onto her porch, holding a mug she had no intention of drinking from. The rumor mill was already warming up. Karen ended the call with a dramatic sigh and crossed her arms, planting herself near the curb as if guarding the perimeter. "They race on their way," she announced. I nodded. "All right." That seemed to irritate her more than if I had argued. She clearly expected panic, or at least discomfort. Instead, I checked the time and sent a quick message, confirming the contractors should proceed once the concrete was poured. 10 minutes passed. Then faintly, in the distance, came the sound she'd been waiting for. Sirens, not blaring at full emergency pitch, but loud enough to announce authority. Karen's posture straightened instantly. She smoothed her blazer, adjusted her sunglasses, and gave me a look that practically said, "This is what happens when you ignore me." The police cruiser turned onto our street slowly, lights flashing but siren cutting off as it approached. It rolled to a stop near the cones. The entire block seemed to hold its breath. 2 officers stepped out. Karen wasted no time. She hurried toward them before they even closed their doors. "Officers, thank you for coming," she began, gesturing wildly in my direction. "This man has blocked a community access road and is refusing to move." One officer glanced at the wide, empty street. The other looked at the cones sitting neatly within my driveway boundary. "Ma'am," the taller officer asked carefully, "which road is blocked?" She pointed dramatically at my truck, parked across my own driveway entrance. That one. The officer blinked once. That's his driveway. It connects to the neighborhood. She insisted. This is a shared access HOA community. He doesn't get to decide when it's closed. I stepped forward calmly. Hands visible. Posture relaxed. Morning. Officers. They nodded back. Professional. Neutral. Is there a problem here? The shorter officer asked me. Contracted maintenance. I replied evenly. Drainage line reinforcement under my driveway. Work order filed through housing management. Temporary blockage for safety. Karen scoffed loudly. He didn't get HOA approval. The taller officer looked between us. Is this HOA property? I met his gaze. No, sir. Karen's voice rose half an octave. It absolutely is. I am on the compliance committee. The officer glanced back at the base housing signage posted at the entrance of the subdivision. Visible even from where we stood. His expression shifted slightly, but he kept it neutral. Marem, he said gently. We just sought this out. Karen folded her arms. Clearly confident this was moments away from ending in handcuffs, or at least a stern warning in her favor. I could feel every neighbor watching now. Phones subtly raised. One kid even pedaled his bike slower than humanly possible to stay within earshot. Sir, the shorter officer said to me, do you have identification? There it was. Karen's lips curled into a small, victorious smile. I reached calmly into my back pocket and handed it over. The shorter officer took my identification and studied it carefully. His expression didn't change at first. Just professional focus as he read the details. The taller officer stepped slightly to the side, glancing between me, the driveway, and Karen, who stood with her arms crossed like she had just submitted the final piece of evidence in a high-profile trial. This is a residential obstruction issue. Karen interjected confidently. He's preventing lawful access. I've already explained the HOA regulations. The shorter officer didn't respond immediately. His eyes moved back to my ID, then up to my face, then back down again as if confirming what he was reading. A faint crease formed between his brows. Sir, he said carefully, can you confirm your current assignment? Yes, I replied evenly. Stationed here. Base command. The words were simple. Calm. Unembellished. Karen huffed softly. That's not relevant. He still has to follow HOA rules like everyone else. The taller officer shifted his weight. Marem, just give us a moment. He walked a few steps away with his partner. Both officers lowering their voices. I didn't need to hear them to know what was happening. The shorter officer handed over my ID. The taller one examined it, and I saw the exact moment recognition hit. His posture straightened almost imperceptibly. The casual stance disappeared. Across the street, Mr. Delgado leaned a little further on his leash, pretending to restrain a very patient golden retriever. Mrs. Patterson adjusted her porch chair without breaking eye contact. Even the contractors had paused their work again. Karen tapped her foot impatiently. Well, she demanded, are you going to make him move it? The officers returned. Their tone had changed, not dramatic, not theatrical, but different, measured. Marm, the taller officer began. We've confirmed that the driveway belongs to him and that scheduled maintenance has been authorized. Karen blinked behind her sunglasses. Authorized by who? Housing Command. The officer replied. She let out a sharp laugh. That's ridiculous. I am on the compliance committee. Nothing like this gets approved without our review. The shorter officer held my ID a little more carefully now before handing it back to me. Sir, he said, voice respectful. Thank you for your patience. Karen's head snapped toward him. Patience. He's obstructing. Marm. The taller officer interrupted gently but firmly. This is federal housing jurisdiction. HOA guidelines do not supersede base authority. Silence fell over the street like someone had flipped a switch. Karen's confident posture faltered just slightly. Federal, she repeated, as if the word tasted unfamiliar. Yes. Marm. She looked from the officers to me and back again, trying to piece together what wasn't lining up in her narrative. So you're just going to let him ignore community standards? The shorter officer cleared his throat. He's not ignoring anything. The air felt heavier now. No longer tense with accusation, but with realization. The neighbors sensed it too. The energy had shifted. Karen removed her sunglasses slowly, squinting at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Who exactly are you? She asked, suspicion edging into her voice. I slid my ID back into my wallet calmly. I live here, I answered. That didn't satisfy her. The taller officer spoke again, choosing his words carefully. Marm, the individual you reported is the acting base commander for this installation. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it landed. Karen's mouth parted slightly. The color drained from her face in stages, like someone lowering the saturation on a screen. For 11 years, she had walked these streets believing she understood the hierarchy of authority here. And now it had just rearranged itself in front of her. Mr. Delgado actually stopped, pretending not to stare. The contractors exchanged a glance that said everything. Karen swallowed. That's not possible, she said quietly. The shorter officer's tone softened. It is. Marm. The street remained silent. For the first time since she clicked across the pavement in those sharp heels. Karen had nothing to say. For a long moment, no one moved. Karen stood frozen in the middle of the street, sunglasses hanging loosely from her fingers. The confidence she'd worn like armor now visibly cracked. The officers remained composed, but there was a subtle shift in their stance, more formal, more attentive. The neighbors across the street had fully abandoned the illusion of subtlety. This wasn't just a dispute anymore. This was a revelation. Karen recovered first, though not gracefully. Well, she said, clearing her throat, attempting to rebuild authority from thin air. That still doesn't change the fact that procedures exist. I let the silence linger before responding. You're absolutely right. Procedures do exist. The taller officer glanced at me briefly, as if measuring how this would unfold. Karen seized on my words. Exactly. So even if you are, whoever you say you are, that doesn't exempt you from the rules. There it was again. Whoever you say you are. I didn't argue. Instead, I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out the folded work authorization form. The official letterhead was unmistakable. Clean. Precise. Federal. I handed it to the taller officer first. He scanned it quickly, then handed it to his partner. Both men nodded almost in sync. Karen shifted her weight. What is that? Maintenance authorization. The shorter officer replied. She took a step forward. Let me see. There was a slight hesitation before the taller officer handed it over. Karen unfolded the paper, eyes scanning the header. I watched the exact moment recognition dawn not of me, but of the insignia printed boldly at the top. Her voice, when she spoke, was no longer sharp. This is signed by. Yes, I said calmly. Her eyes lifted slowly to meet mine. You. The word barely carried. A ripple of quiet understanding moved through the small audience that had gathered. Even from a distance, the neighbors could sense it. The authority she had tried to summon with a phone call now stood directly in front of her. Karen blinked rapidly. You approved your own request. I approved scheduled infrastructure repairs recommended by engineering. I corrected evenly. Following protocol. The officers remained silent, allowing the facts to settle without embellishment. Karen's posture shifted again, but this time not into aggression, into uncertainty. No one informed the HOA. She said weakly, the HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over base utilities. The taller officer reminded her gently. Her grip tightened on the paper, knuckles paling. I was just trying to protect the community, and that's appreciated. I replied, my tone measured but firm. But calling law enforcement over authorized maintenance without verifying jurisdiction first creates unnecessary escalation. That word hit differently now. Escalation. She had used it earlier as a threat. Now it described exactly what she had done. The shorter officer cleared his throat politely. Filing a false obstruction complaint, even unintentionally, diverts emergency resources. Her eyes widened slightly. I didn't file anything false. No one's accusing you of intent. The officer replied carefully. But we do encourage confirming facts before contacting dispatch. The neighborhood was silent enough to hear a breeze rustle through the trees. Karen's gaze dropped to the document in her hands. The clipboard that had once been clutched tightly now hung forgotten at her side. For the first time since she marched across the pavement in those sharp, authoritative steps, she looked smaller. She folded the paper neatly and handed it back to me without meeting my eyes. I wasn't aware. She said quietly. I can see that. I replied. There was no sarcasm. No triumph. Just fact. The taller officer stepped back slightly. If there's nothing further, we'll clear the call. Karen nodded stiffly. The officers returned to their cruiser. Professionalism intact. But the entire dynamic of the street had shifted. The flashing lights turned off. The engine hummed softly before the vehicle rolled away. All that remained was the quiet neighborhood and the weight of realization. Karen adjusted her blazer slowly, regaining composure piece by piece. This could have been handled differently. She murmured. Yes. I agreed. She hesitated, then gave a short, restrained nod before turning and walking back toward her house. No dramatic heel clicks this time. No raised voice. No declarations. Just silence. The contractors resumed their work. Across the street, Mr. Delgado finally continued his walk. And just like that, the name that changed the room settled into the pavement like it had always belonged there. By late afternoon, the street looked normal again. The cones were gone. The concrete had set clean and smooth. And my truck was back in the garage. If someone had driven through at that moment, they would never have guessed that flashing lights had reflected off these houses just hours earlier. But inside the neighborhood clubhouse, things were anything but normal. An emergency HOA board meeting had been called. The email went out just after noon's subject line, marked urgent. Mandatory attendance for committee members. Agenda: clarification of jurisdictional authority and community compliance procedures. The phrasing was careful, almost sterile. It avoided names. It avoided specifics. But everyone knew. I arrived right on time. The clubhouse doors were propped open, and the hum of tense conversation drifted into the parking lot. As I stepped inside, the room quieted by degrees. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to be noticeable. Karen was seated at the long conference table near the front. No clipboard this time. No sunglasses. Just a stack of papers neatly aligned in front of her. Her posture was upright, composed, but there was a stiffness to it that hadn't been there that morning. The HOA president, a retired accountant named Harold, cleared his throat as I entered. "Thank you for coming," he said, offering a tight smile. "Of course," I replied. I took a seat along the side wall rather than at the head of the table. This wasn't about dominance. It was about clarity. Harold shuffled his notes nervously. "It has come to our attention," he began, choosing each word like it carried weight, "that there may have been some misunderstanding regarding the extent of HOA oversight within base housing property." A few board members nodded carefully. Karen kept her gaze fixed on the table. Harold continued, "We have since confirmed that infrastructure, road access, and utility maintenance fall under Federal Housing Command Authority." The word federal seemed heavier indoors. One of the board members raised a tentative hand. "So, we don't approve those requests?" "No," Harold said quietly. "We do not." A murmur spread briefly through the room before settling again. Harold turned slightly toward me. "We'd like to formally acknowledge that this morning's incident was the result of overstepping our jurisdiction." There it was, as close to an apology as HOA language tends to get. Karen finally looked up. Her expression was controlled, but the confidence that once fueled it had softened into something more measured. "I acted based on what I believed was a violation," she said evenly. "I was unaware of the chain of command." Her voice wasn't sharp anymore. It wasn't theatrical. It was careful. "I understand," I replied. "But escalating directly to law enforcement without confirming authority creates unnecessary strain." The room grew still again. Harold nodded quickly. "We agree. Going forward, all compliance concerns will be verified with Housing Administration before any external reports are made." Another board member spoke up. "We'll also be revising the community guidelines to clearly define the limits of HOA enforcement." Karen inhaled slowly before speaking again. "I apologize for the escalation. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was direct." A few heads turned subtly in her direction. In 11 years, Karen had built a reputation for never backing down. for always being certain. Today, certainty had met structure. I appreciate that, I said calmly. My goal isn't to undermine community standards. It's to ensure they operate within proper authority. Harold straightened in his chair. Effective immediately. Any fines or warnings issued regarding this morning's maintenance are null and void. There had been fines drafted already. That didn't surprise me. Karen gave a small nod, accepting the decision without protest. The meeting continued for another 15 minutes. Mostly procedural adjustments and policy clarifications. The tension gradually eased, replaced by something quieter realignment. When it adjourned, chairs scraped softly against the floor. Board members gathered their papers. Conversations resumed, though at lower volumes. As I stood to leave, Karen approached. For a moment, it was just the two of us near the exit. I truly didn't know, she said. I believe you, I answered. She hesitated, then added, It won't happen again. I am sure it won't. Outside, the evening sun cast long shadows across the same pavement where she had stood triumphantly that morning. The neighborhood looked unchanged. But it wasn't because now everyone knew exactly who she had reported. And more importantly, exactly who she reported to. If you enjoy stories like this, hit subscribe and don't miss the next HOA showdown.